I think God wrestles with us in these inconvenient, uncomfortable times. I think God wrestles with us to break the leg of our independence so that we have to rely on Him rather than continuing in our own strength. In other words, the limping produces leaning. So I'm going to tell you, can I tell you some more stories? Is that okay? So I just mentioned that, being fearful. I was speaking with Sean Tavitt, if he's in here, and a few others from his team yesterday about this story as we were dialoguing about it. It's funny looking back now, but at the time it was terrifying. It was one of the only times where I literally felt that I was going to die. My family is from South Georgia. That's where I'm from. You would never know it from how I sound, but the rest of my family, yeah. The rest of my family you'd think they're a Duck Dynasty cast. There's nothing Southern about me besides liking Southern food. And so I was back visiting them a few years ago, and they live sort of in the edge of the woods, and not so much anymore. My prayer time's different now, but one of the main way that I used to pray is I would go on long walks and listen to worship and just pray in the Spirit. And it's an amazing thing, and I was walking out and listening with headphones in, had my YouTube going on my phone, listening to worship, and I'm walking out around the woods. Now, I'm the complete opposite of my younger brother, who everything he does is hunting. I'm not very woodsy. So I'm just on a prayer walk, going through the woods, and it's a beautiful thing when you get lost in the Lord and worship. It's not a beautiful thing when you get literally lost. So it was late at night, and by the time I started thinking I should probably head back, now Georgia woods at night, it is black. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And so now I'm lost out in the middle of the woods. My phone's almost dead, and I don't know how to get back to my house. As my wife or anyone could tell you how terrible I am at administration or directions or anything like that. I have no idea. I don't know where north is, east, south. I don't know how to get back home. And I'm just lost in the middle of the woods. And I'm thinking, well, this is great. And I started to hear, we have coyotes. You start to hear them howling. We've got wild hogs, everything out there that I don't want to be around. And I remembered the advice that my brother told me, which was if you ever are lost, just look for any source of light and follow it. So I wandered around for a while and eventually saw a light. And we have very few neighbors. We're out, we're in the sticks. And so I thought that's either going to be my family's porch light or another one of our few neighbors, and they'll drive me home or something. So I started following the light, and eventually I get close enough to it where I begin to see it. I remember it is dark. So I eventually get close enough where I can see it's not a porch light, it's a campfire. And when I get a little bit closer and a little bit closer, I get close enough, maybe from about me to where John Gallagher is here. And there's these 10 girls that are all standing around this campfire, and it was literally a coven of witches. They're all in black hoods, pulled up over their heads, standing around the fire. I normally don't share this part, but they had actually killed a cat, thrown it in the middle of the fire, and I could see it there, dead. So now, as I said, it's funny now looking back, but it was not funny at the time. I mean, think of this. You're there, you're lost in the woods, you stumble upon a witch coven. And they've sacrificed something already, and the only thing going through your mind is you're going to be the next sacrifice. So I was about this far away, and the only thing I was not thinking, I need to minister to them. I'm thinking, I need to get out of here. And my heart is... So I've tried to kind of get away somehow. I don't know if it was a leaf or what. I made noise. So they all turned and looked at me, and one of them said, "What are you doing here?" And I always thought that, Andrew, you were talking about Smith Wigglesworth. I always thought I would be like Smith in one of these occasions, where Satan shows up at the foot of your bed and you just rebuke him, or you're like, oh, it's just you go back to sleep. I always thought I'd be like that. Not so. Not so. I was petrified. My brain was literally screaming. I was almost like I could see the signal screaming at my legs, run, run. I used to watch movies where people were paralyzed in fear, and I thought it was just fake, just a movie thing. And I was paralyzed. I discovered this, oh, that's not fake. I can't move. She says it 2 more times. I can't move. After the 3rd time, when she says, what are you doing here? Again, just as one of these words of knowledge came forth, just out of my mouth. I said, I'm here because God sent me here to tell you that he's real and that he loves you. And it was like 2 seconds of fear lifting off, and immediately, all of it came back. What I would have wanted to do is release that word and turn and bolt. But I said it and I couldn't move. And so she starts wailing so hard she's shaking and screaming and crying. And the rest of the 9 girls, I wish I could have been able to lead them to the Lord. They all turned and they ran off. I never saw or heard from them again. So she's standing there crying, shaking. I still can't move. And eventually, my legs are like jello, but eventually I make my way slowly up to her. And when I get just a few feet away, she reaches out and grabs me and hugs me. And we go down to the ground and she's shaking. When you're crying that intensely, you're often hyperventilating, so she can't really speak to me. And eventually when that wears off, she begins to tell me this amazing story of, what I thought was an accident of being lost in the woods. It was providence. It was providential. That I didn't see at the time, and things that you're not going to see at the time, that you'll think, I've stumbled into this, but you haven't. You've had the availability, and God gives his ability. So I'm going to try to tell this without crying. She begins to explain how she was raised actually Pentecostal Christian. Her mother's Pentecostal. And in her teenage years, she was 18 at the time, that she began getting interested in Reiki and New Age crystals and things like that, and had this friend group that was there with her in the woods. And eventually it escalated into full-blown occultism. And there were self-mutilation and a lot of dark things that they were gripped in. And every day for the past year, she had been arguing, butting heads with her mother. Because her mother, she lived upstairs, she would come down, and every morning her mom would say, I'm praying for you, sweetie, that you know the love of Jesus. And that morning, it's back to the providence thing. That morning, she came down the stairs. Her mom said, I'm praying for you, sweetie, that you know the love of Jesus. And she said, I wish you would just be quiet with all of that. The only way I'm ever going to believe a word you say is if someone comes up to me tonight, sent from God, to say that he's real and that he loves me. And so again, even in that moment of fear, of trembling, of not wondering if I'm going to make it out of this, I'm thinking that it's accidental, that I've just stumbled into this place upon this group, this gripped in darkness. It was not an accident. And the Lord, 2 Samuel 14:14 says, God devises ways so that a banished person will not remain estranged from him. Is the fact that he loves his people so deeply, so intently, that he co-labors with you and I as ministers of reconciliation. But it's from a place of discomfort. It's from a place of inconvenience. I like to think often too, if you remember Jacob wrestling with God in Genesis. You guys remember that story? And on the heels of it, he gets a re-identification. He says, you're no longer going to be called Jacob, but you'll be called Israel, which means prince with God. Which is funny because Jacob means supplanter, and it's a bit of irony there to me. It's God supplanted the supplanter. So you're going to be called Israel. And something happens on the heels of that wrestling match. He's touched on the hip, and for the rest of his days, he walks with a limp. I think God wrestles with us in these inconvenient, uncomfortable times. I think God wrestles with us to break the leg of our independence so that we have to rely on him rather than continuing in our own strength. In other words, the limping produces leaning. He doesn't want you to lean on your own understanding. He doesn't bring you into discomfort just because he just gets a kick out of you being uncomfortable. It's out of his goodness. It's because he knows if I never put them in a place where they're in over their head, they will never be forced to see the manifestation of what I put on the inside of them. So he intentionally places you in areas where he has to manifest opposite of your surroundings. Otherwise, you'll think that the surroundings is the source.